You
the
know
the
what?
dark side. You're ready for the
Yeah,
dark Dave,
yeah.
dark side of Dave. When
I
will
want.
it when will it
I
emerge?
want to see it, man. I want to see Anakin go to Darth
Uh,
Vader, bro. We're in the single digits now, Daddy. Let's go. It is right down the way. What is it? 5 from the time we're recording.
five?
5.
Yeah, I think it's five. I forget how to count. It's been so many years we've been doing this. I'm excited, man. Let's go.
Dude, it's a beautiful thing. Been watching film brought to you by our friends at Renewal by Anderson, E. White, John Ellis. The clanging and banging is around the corner. Tuesday, your Carolina Panthers take the field, man. Of course, the rookies. Ned will see the full team on Wednesday. But, dude, I'm excited because this is my first training camp, right? You know, this is my first time ever covering a training camp, period. So I'm stoked. I'm excited. It's gonna be a lot of fun, man. This for you. I mean, like, listen, what is this? Your 8th now at this point?
That'll be ninth, number
Ninth.
9 for your boy, Mister. Listen, we talk
How
about
with our
the
boy
gray,
BY?
the gray hairs, are coming in here. We've been doing this for a minute, and for those that are getting to know your story, you've covered teams along the way here in big markets. Philadelphia comes to mind, Minnesota. So, to have you by my side here is awesome to go into this training camp season. And it's great. We talked about this last week, and a lot of folks have chimed in. We tweeted stuff out at Been Watching Film this week and at One Panther Place. You can follow E White as well. Just some memories about training camp. We'll get into that later, but I know a lot of our friends down here. I'm in Spartanburg, so it's tough. We talked about this last week, but in a couple of years, hopefully by next year, we got fans back at camp. But in the meantime, we're your eyes, we're your ears, and hopefully you can trust our observations. That's what we take a lot of pride in that.
No, exactly. And obviously follow along with us. I'm at You White on the mic at One Panther Place. Like, we will be wall to wall coverage with this stuff. So, whatever we can get for you, obviously, because let's be real, it's training camp. There's times we won't be able to film. There's times we just won't be able to get content, and that is what it is.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, listen, we, and selfishly, I'd like to think we kind of know what we're doing sometimes. Somebody said on TikTok the other day, the ball knowledge is strong with these lads. So shout out to Brian on TikTok. We appreciate you, brother.
Brian.
And if you don't rely on us, don't worry. There's plenty of great people out there. Our friend Mike Kay and obviously Nick Carboni, those guys. There's so many great we are spoiled. And let me, before we get into the training camp, I just want to take a moment, because I think we have gotten to know a lot of great people, covering this team, and just it feels really nice knowing all of us we kind of have an everybody eats mentality. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
It's like once we go into the press conferences and go into or covering on the sidelines, whatever it might be, whether it's Nick Carboni from WCNC, the Mike Kays of the world from The Observer, Sheena Quick, Chris Lee from out in Raleigh. Everybody is just so cool and hey, we're all here to support this team, at least, support the coverage of this team and through the good, bad, and the ugly. We're here to make sure that we have great content for everybody.
Yeah, quick story on that. And I'm glad you touched on this because, we don't want to make this all about us, but it's important because it is a great community. Look, I've covered the world of sports since 2003. And, it's been through print. What's that, Dad? Print? What are you doing? Yeah, I was a newspaper scribe way back in the day. But about, let's say 15 years ago, I covered my first camp, 2011. Yeah, 15 years ago to this week, basically. And one of the guys I have to give a shout out to was Joe Person. Joe was incredibly kind, and I think that was his first year on the Panthers beat for the Charlotte Observer. Now he's with the Athletic. Joe couldn't have been nicer to a guy that was just a whippersnapper. I mean, I had nothing. I was a blogger. I was a part-time stringer with the Herald Journal, and he took me kind of under his wing and made sure that I knew what was what and what not to do and where not to step. And since then, you mentioned some of my favorite people, not to mention Vashti Hurt and then, Sheena. Nick Carboni has been a great friend personally. He was probably as instrumental to me as anybody getting me off and running back in 2019 when I started One Panther Place. He would, when nobody else would answer the call, maybe other than Joe, he was right there. Jim Zolke comes to mind. There's just it's going to be like an Oscar speech. I'm going to forget too many people.
It's
Mike K is a
true.
great friend of ours, and he's a
Love
good dude, man. He'll shoot it straight. Mike will be like, "Wow, you're wrong on that, but I still love you, buddy. But you're
No,
stupid." But we
no,
love
well,
Mike for that.
it's great, like I
Yeah,
think about Sheena, like well, I remember when the
yeah,
first time I really like met Sheena, like we see each other in
yeah.
in the press box and everything, but it does, you're not always talking. It's pretty silent
Sure.
on game day. We're all just
Yeah,
focused, locked in and everything. I remember really meeting Sheena for the first time when we went down to Tampa. And just like
yeah.
I
She's
think the
great.
biggest thing and the thing that I love the most is just I never like people looking and feeling like, hey, you're the new person. And like me being in the press
Yeah,
box last year, I was very much that. And like to a degree, like, listen, 99.7 The Fox, for everybody who's like, that's the flagship of the Panthers, is where I'm
yeah,
based. We're a classic rock station. And to be honest with you, the coverage on the Fox has never been that of actual football. It's been way more fan based, and like I
hmm
value that absolutely. I think the world we live in now with sports, where we have brands like people like Pat McAfee or like the
yeah,
snapback sports or the front office sports of the world that get nitty gritty with the fans. I think there's value in that, and that's somebody that I try to
yeah.
be. But also, I think there's a real deal journalism aspect to this, and
Sure. Yeah,
and to feel like I didn't belong was my biggest fear. And people like Sheena quelled that immediately. Like, just treated me like I was, asked me what my story was. We just
yeah,
chopped it up and everything. It was just easy. And like that's the thing that you really appreciate is just everybody's got the same respect in the room. Nobody's trying to like, there's not like stepping on toes or anything, like station to
no.
station or TV station to TV station,
Oh,
blog to blog. It's great.
we come from you and I come from a business where it can get nasty. And there were
Dude.
many years ago these manufactured radio wars and all that, and even our radio colleagues out there that we aren't going to mention any other stations because we're not stupid, but we love
No,
all of our friends with all the stations out there. Man,
right.
it's a good group. We're very blessed because other markets I've heard stories. Let's just say
I've,
that.
I've, I've listen, man. I grew up in Philly. I've heard it on the air. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
heard it on the air, and and I've been lucky to work in a lot of markets where it doesn't feel that way. But I've
yeah,
also worked in markets that it does, and it's unhealthy. And you move on from that, and you're like, oh wow, like this is I remember there's just certain times I would cover certain teams and all of a sudden you say something on a podcast and it becomes a topic on another podcast and they're calling you like frauds or whatever, and I'm like, what are we doing here?
nobody
Like
wants
this
to
is
hear that. Nobody
it's
cares.
unhealthy. Yeah, who
Nobody
cares, dude? Who
cares.
cares
Here's what
about
people
podcast
want.
beef?
Well,
Yeah,
I always think about what I would want if I wasn't doing this, and that's
yeah,
what inspired me to get into this whole thing. Is what's missing, and to me, it was historical content. To me, it was like some perspective on, bridging the past to the present, and even looking to the future, and then adding in a splash of analysis on the film side. And
yeah.
so, what we strive to do here, you and I both, as a team, and it's pretty good in this market right now. So for those that might complain about our coverage as a whole, we've got a whole bunch of people with us here to do the same thing. They really care about the game
Dude,
and they ask hard questions. And we're not afraid to do that either. And that's very important too, to be tough but fair, because there's still a lot of questions we have about what this team is doing moving forward as we get into another training camp.
my goal is to create smarter fans at the end of the day. I think you
Yeah.
and I both go into this, like whether it be historical, film wise,
Yeah.
even to just like what's going on in the locker room. I want fans to feel
Yeah.
that
That's it.
that they are informed and to feel that they can watch a game of football, not just as a fan, but if they want to get into the nitty gritty, they
Yeah.
absolutely can, and find that there's an approachable avenue to that. So
Yeah.
you say all that to say,
Well
and you
said.
mentioned the things that are and the uncertainty and all that. It's there's certainly plenty of it going into training camp. And
Sure. Yeah.
let's be frank for a second. There are so many question marks that we have. I mean, there are the ones that we
hmm
don't, and that's good. It's like, okay, cool. We know who our quarterback is. We know what the situation defensively is on a
Yep.
lot, it's in a lot of aspects, like on the defensive
hmm
line, and with Devin Lloyd and Jalen Phillips, and with Horn
Yep.
and Jackson. We talked a lot about the tandem of Mike Jackson and J.C. Horn last week, and the potential they have in the pantheon of the history of this team. But
Yeah.
then you look at the offensive line, you look at the wide receiving core, you look in the
hmm
backfield. There's a lot to be unpacked. And
Yeah.
it's not, it's hard to figure out where you start. And I think naturally for fans, the first place you start is in the wide receiving core, because
Mm-hmm.
you still have that massive question mark. And now that there's more and more rumors happening with Xavier Legette, there's more and more conversations about that wide receiver 3 position. And
Sure.
it's again a lot to unpack here between
Oh, yeah.
Legette and Chris Brazzell. And then again, this is a very crowded wide receiver room. We got about 8 or 9 on the depth chart. There's a lot to unpack here, John.
Yeah, and with Xavier, we don't know, but we kind of get the feeling. You start to hear things, and this dates back to last season when I had heard from people around the building and other places around the league that no big shock that Xavier, look, it's time to put the pedal to the metal. It's time to start getting the details right in terms of what's happening in the game. Again, he's a very good guy and he really wants to get better. This is not the case of somebody who's not trying. But the confidence needs to be there on game day, or else a business decision eventually needs to be made in terms of not just reps, not just snaps, but maybe another destination at some point. You mentioned Chris Brazzell coming in. Interesting to see how they'll deploy him. That's the one thing about training camp that we'll get a good view of, and they won't tip their hand completely, but during the scrimmages, it's going to be big to see where the guys line up in terms of alignment. How much of a condensed formation will we see at times? How many gadget plays come out of that? Any jet sweeps? And Brazzell in particular, how comfortable are they putting him in the slot, given the fact that that position requires a certain amount of diversity in your route tree? And, Tennessee not necessarily known for that on the college side, but Brazzell as a prospect seems to favor, a guy that can play inside, but more particularly on the outside. Where does Coker fall into this rotation? There's no real defined position for Coker or Brazzell. Xavier still has an opportunity here. I would point to a guy like John Mechie. I'm excited to see him.
Yes.
Eric, we talked about the fact that we look back at some of Bryce Young's best film ever, which comes by way of Alabama
Who's
against some of the
catching that
best.
damn ball? Who's catching that damn ball?
It was Isaiah Bond and John Mechie. And Mechie was the guy doing a lot of the work. And he is an impressive young man. He's gone through some injuries, but I think this team really likes what they've seen during the offseason. Jimmy Horn. We'll see if Jimmy can take the next step as a guy that they really favored as a rookie last season and got some touches, made some big plays in a couple of big games, and also had a couple of moments I'm sure he would like to have back. But so can be said about all the rookies. But you're right, Xavier Legette, obviously, it's a storyline to follow, and we'll see once we get into, full pads and in some of the walkthroughs over the next couple of weeks, what his role, if any, is moving forward. I would suspect he'll be here at least through camp. That's my guess. I don't have any sources on it, but it's time to step on it, man. It's time to take advantage because now there's real true competition and it's a crowded room.
Exactly. And we've seen the tape from Xavier in the offseason working with the receiver factory, with Chad Ochocinco, obviously, or Chad Johnson now, obviously in ways that, we haven't seen from him. And, it's great to see. But then we also saw how good Chris Brazzell looked in rookie minicamp. Now, again, it's minicamp, right? But just showing off that athleticism is something special. And that's the thing, is that this receiving core, the nice part is that there are, once you get past T-Mac and Jalen Coker, you have guys that kind of have a specialty, quote unquote, right? Where it's like Legette's a little bit more physical. A guy like Brazzell is more of a deep ball threat and can kind of, do those unusual different like formations and such. And then a guy like a Jimmy Horn, who's a speedster, a guy like John Mechie, who has that kind of similar vibe. Bryson Tremaine, we didn't even talk about him, and he had some great moments last year as well. A big, like a giant wide receiver, literally. That's always good to see. Like, there's a lot of avenues to go down. Then you have a guy like David Moore, who, again, we talked about last week with Nick Scott, just having that veteran presence in the locker room. Yeah, maybe he's not getting as many reps on the field, but nonetheless, having that quote unquote unk in the locker room does benefit your team.
They like him. Just like they like, it's a great comparison with Nick Scott in terms of David Moore, a guy that It doesn't matter what we feel as analysts. It doesn't matter what the fans may feel based on a handful of plays that are good or bad or indifferent. If there's trust from the staff and the head man in charge, Canales, you're probably going to find yourself on that roster. You can add value on special teams. That's another thing you look at when you look at this receiver room.
Yeah.
At the bottom of the heap, who gives you the most total value? I look at Bryson Tremaine as an example. You got to look at everything in terms of structure and how you balance out your offense. So a lot of what Carolina likes to do, and I'm assuming this will continue under the play calling of Brad Idzik, is 12 and sometimes 13 personnel when you have 2, 3 tight ends. We saw this a lot last year, and Bryson Tremaine was sort of that ex-receiver in those 13, 12 personnels, and he would crack down. He would be in the blocking game. He's also a capable short area intermediate receiver. And so they value that. They value a guy that can play sort of a tight end blocking role in an 13, 12 personnel formation look. And I think that's something that favors Tremaine. They trust him. And so as we go through these evaluations, and it's germane to the point of Xavier Legette as well, you either have the trust or they're still trying to figure out if they trust you, or you're losing trust, or they've lost all trust. And where on that meter is a guy like Legette, I would say more towards that back end, and a guy like Tremaine and Moore, maybe not nearly as athletic. In fact, we know that. But boy, the trust factor's there. They're going to do what they're asked to do. It's almost as if, and again, I'm not picking on Xavier. We love him. But if you take the assignment part of how it's mastered by a David Moore or even a Tremaine and add it to Legette's day-to-day, snap-to-snap game, in game, then he would be a 800-yard receiver easily. He's got to be more detailed.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I love the point you bring up about Bryson Tremaine, especially with the injury issues this tight end unit has had over the past couple of years. It's a reality that having that at 12, 13 personnel, when you can't do like something like, let's be real, Dave Canales really loved a triple tight end look occasionally last year. And that was something that we saw, a few times, right? And being able to have that X receiver that can, ultimately block as well as he does. Yes, Bryson Tremaine, I couldn't agree more. You mentioned the special teams. Jimmy Horn, worst comes to worst, if he's not catching balls, he's catching punts and he's catching kick returns. Oh, yeah. Dude's got speed. And let's be real, there's a benefit there. I mean, Jimmy Horn was towards the upper half of the league when it came to yardage for returns last year. And you love to see that. And again, he has sure hands with that as well. And I think that there's a benefit to that. And so there's a lot of, again, we go back to it, a lot of different guys with a lot of different skill sets. And that's why having this, heavy looking receiving room might not necessarily be a bad thing. Now, as far as it goes with Legette, listen, if we knew more than we do about the trust that the front office and that Dave Canales and the coaching staff has, we would tell you. But the fact of the matter is that we just don't know. They are keeping their cards very close to their chest, and that's smart on Dan Morgan's part. That's smart on Dave Canales' part, because they're probably getting calls daily. If not daily, at least every other day, like, hey, we need a wide receiver. Is Legette available? There are teams that are like for as as many question marks as there are in this locker room, there are bigger ones, Miami, that for example, that have even bigger question marks than this roster has with the Carolina Panthers.
That cupboard is bare. That is bone dry. They got nothing
about it. We've talked about it. There are teams that have one wide receiver and that's it. You know what I mean? There are just like teams you look at that once you get past the wide receiver one, all of it is question marks. I think about Philadelphia. They just got rid of A.J. Brown. It's Devontae Smith and did they even re-sign Jahan Dawson? I don't even know. It's like there's not much behind that depth chart. So, ultimately there's a lot of teams that could use a guy like an Xavier Legette. So naturally we're not hearing nearly as much about it. So I don't want to beat a dead horse here. We have constantly, that might be a bad pun with Xavier. I didn't even think about that. Maybe we move on now on that note. Anyway, we mentioned Jimmy Horn. We mentioned some of the special teams. We're going to act like that didn't happen one, John Ellis.
That wasn't. You didn't have that on the cue sheet like Jim Nantz ready to go. Not to beat a dead horse, but maybe that's a bad one.
At least it's not as bad as like that ball be sorely missed as they're doing the tribute to a fallen war hero.
Oh my
Remember
God.
That was insane. Wasn't that the guy that got suspended for the slurs too? Yeah, yes, I think it was.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Xavier's miles from that.
When we move on to the running back room here, God. Oh man! Thank God I'm not actually in the pit. You know, I mean, Anish would literally kick me immediately. I would get a swift kick from Anish Shroff had I say anything like that. Besides the point, we talked about the special teams a little bit. Trevor Achane, one of the members of that special teams unit, I've been seeing some of the tape from him, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, cool. He wants to make it a race in the running back room as well. You know, increase this committee conversation. I mean, he wants to show that, hey, it's not just Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks. Same deal with A.J. Dillon. You know, this is a pretty crowded running back room that will likely get shrunken down. You know, but another big question mark there, is Jonathan Brooks' health, but also with Chuba. And I, it's funny. When I was reviewing this room, we were on call together, so this was a solo episode for mine. But I kept on talking about how everybody seems to be counting Chuba out, but at the end of the day, financially speaking, there's an investment there. But also, now you suddenly have focus back on you. Right, post Rico, obviously Rico had a fantastic year, 1,000-yard season.
Sure, yeah.
Gets his bag in Pittsburgh, earns that bag. As colorful as I've been about Rico Dowdle, I'll admit that he earned his money. Chuba now ultimately trying to solidify himself, and again with a running back that had a fantastic college career, and ultimately now that hopefully he's healthy and hopefully everything's good. He obviously wants to prove himself and get plenty of reps. But Chuba, listen, if you want to get the majority of carries here, we need to see the Chuba Hubbard of the second half of the season that we saw in Carolina.
Yeah, well said. It is sort of a mental reset we're all going through. And I know it's probably a bigger deal for the fans because, you're looking at it from a distance. But from my perspective, Hubbard, injury notwithstanding, and again, these things happen at the running back position, he is one of the more valuable pieces on this team, and I'll tell you why, okay? So there's a morale component to this that can't be ignored. Hubbard, to a man, I think if you ask anybody on that team, and this is one of the observations that you get when you go to training camp and you watch and you're there from, start to finish, and then you stay late. Chuba worked extremely hard his second year and into his third year on his hands. So part of the knock on Hubbard in the beginning was, number one, contact balance. When you looked at tape, there were some moments where it felt like, and again, I'm just observing tape here, he could have had that contact balance to get to the second, third level and get a more explosive play. He's clearly worked on that through his physique and through, I'm sure, a lot of different methods that are way out of my ballpark. But what you can see is his hands. To become the complete back and to make the big bucks in this league, you need to be at least an above-average receiver out of the backfield. There are some guys who just simply can't do it. They have hands of stone. It's like this. There's nothing you can do about it. Hubbard spends more time on that jugs machine than anybody, and he still does it to this day, whether it's OTAs, whether it's training camp. And he has turned his game around to where he can not only do that, but pass protection, which is incredibly important in this offense. If you look at some of the big plays that were made last year, including one of the deep shots in the Rams regular season game, and I'll pull the tape on that and we'll post it later. He was right there in pass pro, holding down the fort. There are several examples of this where I would say Jonathan Stewart was the best pass pro block that we have seen in this franchise history in terms of pass protection. Hubbard's right up there in terms of a very underrated, I should say, element of the game. And as far as Brooks goes, there is a lot of excitement about him. I'm excited about it. I'm excited as a fan of football, as a guy that loves film. You look back at his tape at Texas, the limited reps he had a couple of years ago here, you can see it. We just need to see and be patient. I would just caution everybody not to get too overwhelmed if it's not exactly how you want it to look week 1, week 3, week 4. I would like to see him in some preseason action, but again, they may want to limit his ability to get out there so he's fresh for the regular season. And then you get down to the third spot. And A.J. Dillon is a fascinating guy. He's a guy that had great
Quadzilla,
success
baby.
in Green Bay. Quadzilla, that's right. He still got it. He didn't have a lot of action in Philly because there was this guy named Saquon Barkley and this other thing called the tush push, and that took care of everything A.J. Dillon's good at, which is short yardage.
Yes.
But you think about Dillon. He's very good with his hands out of the backfield, too. He had a lot of receptions in his time with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay and with Jordan Love as well. So I wouldn't sleep on him as far as, and I'm getting used to this again. HN, is it HN? HN? It's
HN. So yeah, it's,
HN.
it was like the kid in Miami. It's
so
HN.
they're both going. They're both now. It's not just Travis. It's Trevor as well.
I'm
assuming.
I don't know, but like I don't want to correct Travis, like so until I hear from Trevor that we can say ETN, I'm going to default to HN.
One would assume. Big number 23, we'll just say that. He had some ups and downs in the return game last year. And I think that's maybe where this third spot comes down to in a way. And we talk about this with wide receivers as well. What are your contributions on special teams looking like? Are you still a guy that they value in terms of a third option at back? He's got some explosion on him, and I like him as a prospect, and I think he's done some good things as a pro, but I don't think they would keep more than 3 on the active roster.
They can't.
Given the other things they've got to do there. But yeah, I'm excited to see Brooks in action. I think Chuba, we got swept up in Rico Mania last year, and we should have, because he was explosive. He came into that Miami game and took us by storm.
But this team would not have been the same without Rico last year, and we can all be honest with each other here.
I agree.
He was a difference maker and won some pivotal games for this team.
Yeah. Cuba's the kind of guy I think that you can get consistency out of that maybe you can't get out of a Rico Dowdle. That's where I'll leave it. Not quite maybe as instantly explosive. Rico was a bona fide guy coming in too. He had a 1,000-yard season with the Cowboys. So did Chuba a couple of years ago. It comes down to health. You can never have enough running backs, as John Fox once said. So you build a stable that hopefully you can use as interchangeable parts and in different looks, and have Brooks as a certain kind of guy. They run a lot of pony formations, which means, again, this is maybe not a lot, but sample size-wise, a couple of years ago, you had Brooks and Hubbard in the backfield on a couple of occasions, which I love that, because it creates some misdirection. And Bryce can use his legs too. That's another thing we can talk about here. Bryce Young, it's an underrated part of his game. Not only the short area escapability, and I know he's not a running back, and he's never going to be used like a Cam Newton. He shouldn't be. That'd be insane. But he has gotten really good in the past year or so at getting those bonus yards, as I call it, and finding the ability to get yourself 9 yards when nothing's there. Get 10 yards. Maybe get a few rushing touchdowns while you're at it. He's part of this action too. So when you pile up those rushing stats throughout the course of a game, they all matter. They all count. You have your structured runs. You have your sort of designed, I would say, trick plays maybe, or gadget plays. And then you've got your quarterback runs. And usually those with Bryce are not structured. Although I would lean a little more on the read option game with these backs. I would let Bryce pull it and take a few of those and hit the early slide and get out of it.
I've said it before, and I think, when people look at Bryce's peak, I think we don't really have an idea of what that looks like. And because we really haven't seen it a ton yet, I think he's still growing. Yeah. I've said this before on the Tailgate show during preseason or during the regular season. And Bryce Young, I think at his best, can be like a prime Russell Wilson. And people look at that prime Russell Wilson and they're just like, oh, well, he was just a game manager. I'm like, you did not watch Russell Wilson the way that other people watched Russell Wilson. Just the versatility in his game, the vision he had down the field, and ultimately the trust he had of his team while being soft-spoken. Right. Obviously, the Russ Wilson of later years that, was married to Sierra and all that stuff, and the whatever happened in
running laps up and down the row in the airplane, and he wants his own office. That Russ, yeah.
The one that's calling sermons in the locker room, that Russ is a little bit different than the Russ that we knew from the days in Seattle with Pete Carroll, right? Mind you, someone who's probably very mindful of what Bryce can look like and how Bryce could emulate a Russell Wilson is Dave Canales, who was on that staff. Right. So you see that parallel there, I think, if you're Dave Canales. And so with Bryce having that ability, you mentioned the read option, you mentioned those bonus yards, that's exactly what you want from a guy like Bryce. This run game is not going to be the focal point of this offense. I think this is a pass first offense if you ask anybody in this world. But nonetheless, you got to make sure that you have a really solid and good core back there. I don't think we're going to have Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard be D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart. That's just unrealistic.
Maybe
but
what
yet. I do, certainly not yet, but who knows? I could be surprised, and I think that absolutely could happen. But I think that, right now, if you're looking forward to this season, it's a pass first team. It's an air it out kind of team. And you just got to make sure that backfield is still able to manage things. And speaking of airing it out, Chuba, I think when it comes down to catching the ball out of the backfield, there's not many better wheel route runners in this game than Chuba Hubbard. Yeah, Chuba's wheel really route running is really impressive. I remember it was against the Rams in week 13 and the way that he peeled out for that one touchdown catch. Yeah. It was really, really fun to watch him and just watch, the way that he, again, towards the end of the season, watching Chuba was really fun because it felt like he finally got a swagger back, right? But that example right there, I think, that wheel route play, I think that's when you see the deceptive size and strength of Chuba, but also the really crisp route running. When he's healthy and when he's totally on, it's awesome. And let's not forget, too, last year, fumbled the ball once. So all those fumble concerns, everybody being like, he doesn't hold on to the ball. Pump the brakes.
Look, it happened in overtime in a critical game a couple of years ago against Tampa, and that broke his heart, I'm sure. And the team was devastated to lose what was a really exciting game in sort of the leap year into what was eventually a playoff year. But other than that, you can't think of a signature moment where Chuba fumbled a game away. And he's had moments where so underrated is the ability to finish runs, and the backs I think of that were so good at this, Jonathan Stewart, Stephen Davis comes to mind. Cam Newton obviously had his own skill set with this, a handful of others, but he runs behind, his pads. He is always the ability to finish, the ability to get that extra couple of yards. Those are critical in this game. I hate to make it a 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of sermon here, but man, there are teams out there. The Steelers come to mind. A good buddy of mine, Trey Falco, and I did a lot of radio together. He's a big Steelers fan. He would always complain about Najee Harris tackling himself, and Jalen Warren can't get those hard yards. And a guy like Hubbard, maybe more so than Rico. Rico in the open field could blast a couple of guys and get those extra 10 yards. But
you stopped me before I start. You stopped me before I started a rant about Rico tackling himself. But hey, you know what? Beside the point,
we've seen it.
His brother hates me, by the way. I was gonna say, the amount of but the amount of critiques I've given to Rico. His brother follows me on social media just to hate me. so Dre Dowdle, if you're listening, what's up, buddy?
we love Rico. No, Chuba is great. He's fantastic.
Yeah, no, without question, it is just that follow through, everything you said. Again, it's so funny because I feel like we can really, because it was the best game of the season, we point back to the Rams game last year. And not only the Rams game in the middle of the season, but also in the playoffs. The Panthers played their best football against the Rams last season, which if you can do that this year, great. I mean, not that you're facing the Rams. Hopefully you're facing them in the playoffs. Hopefully, but not hopefully. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So either way, it's you played your best football against one of the best teams in the league last year, and I think that's where you saw Chuba really finish runs the way that you're speaking of.
And they did it in a number of ways. I'll go back to something, talk about covering training camp, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. Please. And I talk with my son, Andrew, about this all the time. Andrew, who's going into senior year of high school, wants to be in the scouting world at some point. He's a football savant for his age, and he can help us at some point, I think, on this show. He can teach us a few things because that's all the kid does is watch tape, man. He's a nerd in a good way. But I talked to him a little bit about something that Ron Rivera had said during one of the first training camps I had covered. And I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have the transcript, but it stuck in my mind. He wanted to build a team that could win any way possible. And, I think all teams strive for that, but you're looking to build something where, okay, if it's a 10-7 bully fest, if that's the kind of game you're going to get into with a team, you know how to finish those games. If it's going to be like, oh boy, here comes the greatest show on turf, we're going to have to line up and score 35 points, you have the manpower, the staff, and the players, most importantly, to do that. And I think this Carolina team is starting to resemble a little bit of that. You can win in ugly weather like they did. That monsoon in the third quarter, that was a masterclass, when we played the Rams at home, and when you just Chuba Hubbard left, Chuba Hubbard right, grind the clock down. And then you get into the situation where before you can sit down with your platter from the press box where we were, Carolina's down 2 touchdowns in the playoffs. And so they find a way where the run game essentially gets a little bit neutralized to get Bryce going, to get Coker in the middle of the field open, to pass protect those demons up there pass rushing. So I was really impressed by those 2 Rams games, not only because they won one of them, the other one they basically, it was a moral victory. You can say there aren't those, but for this team emerging, that was a really special moment in the playoffs. You just got to make that one last stop. But offensively in particular, which is what we're focusing on now, you got to find different ways to win. They found in Green Bay running at Parsons at the end of the game. They found with the Rams, there were certain things in the passing game with Emmanuel Forbes they could attack, and those safeties as well. So I'm impressed by that. That's a global staff thing, and that's also personnel as well. So I'm glad you brought up the Rams because it's not only fun to beat the Rams once and almost beat them twice in the playoffs, but to know that that's the best of the best. They've gotten better, obviously, with Myles Garrett and maybe Aaron Donald, but you can go with the best of the best. They've beaten a few of these teams already.
Yeah, no, and especially on the offensive side, but even on the defensive side, when it matters most, they lock in, they click in. Obviously the strip sack from Derek Brown, the picks of Matt Stafford in the playoffs, like there is just a level of when it comes down to winning, they know when to be on top of things and they know when to be locked in with that, which I think is great. Really quickly, just we touched on the defense for the last couple weeks here, so like I don't want to get too far into it, but I do really look forward to seeing how this front seven shakes out. I think that's what I'm most intrigued about, and I think the one person that I'm really looking forward to, and we haven't talked about him nearly enough on this podcast because I think we've just assumed, okay, yeah, no, like listen, Nick Scorton's the next one up on that one side. I don't like when it comes to just leaps this season on this Carolina Panthers team. I think people will look at Nick Scorton and suddenly this goes from serviceable to Pro Bowler, the way that Mike Jackson did last year, right? I think the Mike Jackson story of this year, that come up season, is Nick Scorton. Nick Scorton. When you look at how he played, first of all, if you've ever watched his college tape, oh my God, it's insane. Please watch his tape from Texas A&M.
He was a demon.
Absolute demon. Mind you, again, Texas A&M playing SEC football and absolutely terrorizing offensive lines.
Absolutely.
This guy's insane. He is half of the reason why Will Campbell dropped on draft boards. It's not just it's like Nick Scorton terrorized that.
He made those arms look really short.
That's what I'm saying. And I love him just in general because of how much he loves Charlotte. Like that dude just like rides his bike around Dilworth for funsies and just hangs out. And he's just a good hearted guy. But when it comes to like in between the lines, he's a demon. And this guy, his efficiency last year was great. I think that, he did what a lot of rookies did. And, to be honest with you, like he kind of blew his gasket a couple times and made of, been a little too ambitious and aggressive when he didn't need to be. I think this season, with a little bit more maturity in back of him and everything, and now that he's got another year under his belt, Nick Scorton has the absolute capabilities of taking a step up to the point where this defense that was third to last in sacks last year, I mean, I'm not saying this is a team that can sack a quarterback 50 times, but certainly 35 to 40.
Yeah, I think so. Another thing they would do with Scorton as well, and this is something to keep an eye on as you move forward, is it's a copycat league, and all these guys that run defensive structures, whether it's the Fangio system as we call it now in Carolina, or Wade Phillips version of the 34 from the old days, or even your standard 43 base Sean McDermott type of defense. You're going to find yourself in 4-down situations. So what I'm most interested in when you get into nickel, again, I use the word deployment a lot because you can pigeonhole these guys in positions. They would take Scorton, and they wouldn't be bashful about it. And they'd put him at what's called 3 technique. For those that aren't familiar, that's the old Warren Sapp defensive tackle position where you're looking to split the center and the guard there. And as I say, the guard and the tackle, I should say. That is something I saw them do last year at times with Nick. So you would have what I would refer to as the NASCAR package that dates back to the Giants when they beat the obviously the Spags defense of 2007 and the Perry Fuel 2011. They would have at least 3 speed guys or defensive ends on there. And I could see a situation scenario where you have Derek Brown, Scorton inside, maybe Princely or another piece that they have on the outside of him. And then, of course, Jalen Phillips on the other edge rushing his 4 down. He's a true edge guy, don't get me wrong. But he has that versatility, Scorton does. We saw in college his weight go from the 280 to 260. He was able to change his body composition in college to play a number of roles in a number of systems. And that was as impressive to me as anything. But he can kick inside and play 3 technique. He can play wide 9. He can cover if you need him to, but his bread and butter obviously is setting the edge. He's very good in the run game on that. And he had, 5.5 sacks last year. He's a guy that already has a little bit of momentum going in that department, and he's a rookie. But there are moments where he flashed outside of the passing game. He would chase down some runs. Maybe it was the Atlanta game I'm thinking of at home, where he chased one all the way down to the sideline and prevented a first down. Good hustle stats on him. And I think along with him, I keep mentioning Princely, Oman Mielin, is a guy that when he was on the field, boy, there were some moments where it's like, wow, that athleticism just pops. We just need to define, if you're Carolina, what his role is. Is he a joker type of guy that will come in from time to time and spell Scorton? I don't think there's any doubt Nick is the other guy on the opposite side of Jalen. But you, like we talked about, man, talk to Al Wallace, who is a great friend of ours and a great old Panther head who's worked in the media since. Al's great. And Al was a part of that rotation back in 03, 04 with the Panthers that was 6-7 deep on the defensive line. And that's what they're aiming for. So you hope Scorton takes that leap to where he can become a double-digit sack type of guy. And then Princely's waiting right there to take that next step. And maybe that becomes a battle at some point for reps. But Scorton to me is the leader in the clubhouse as defined by his performance last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned it, Al Wallace was what you and I envisioned Princely being. And so having that is absolutely massive. I think, for anybody who questions Nick Scorton, I think, and this is something where it's like, okay, we're not talking as much about the X's and O's here, but, to be so committed to your position and to the success of your team that you're willing to fluctuate your weight as much as you are, just given off of a, formation itself, that tells you enough as it is. But it's so funny because, the more and more you talk about that Giants defense, the Justin Tuck and Yossi Munoz, and it never felt like that a definitive defensive tackle, which, to be fair here, I mean, yes, Lee Hunter, yes, you have members on this defensive front that are, true defensive tackles, but like Derek Brown is a kind of a hybrid in and of itself. Obviously he plays interior quite a bit, but he's an end in many ways. And so having that, speed on that front line is massive. And obviously, with the physicality on top of that, creates holes for that defensive, for that linebacker core of, Devin Lloyd and obviously Jalen Phillips, who's going to have his edge, but also outside capabilities. There's a lot to be liked here. And so I think, when people, Mina Kimes mentioned this is a potential top 5 defense, it's music to my ears because, I see they're starting to see what we're seeing, and that's the fact that this is a defense that you're going to see a lot of different looks from, a lot of different personnel looks from. So the downside is that the offensive situation will probably be reduced personnel wise to make up on the defensive end to make sure that personnel can be as versatile as it is. So, for those fans out there that are like, oh man, I'm really trying to get behind a John Mechie or a Trevor Etienne or Xavier Legette, whatever it might be, and all of a sudden their name gets called in the cuts. The reason why is because they want to see so many different looks on the defensive end. And I think that's not a bad thing. Ultimately it's all about trying to get wins and trying to win the Super Bowl, man. That's what this team's trying to do. And every year they've been increasing and been better. So we'll get into more of it obviously next week once we see the nitty gritty, but this training camp is going to be pivotal. It's one that Dave Canales described will be the hardest of these players' lives, which is interesting because I see Dave Canales and how laid back he is. And I've never seen Dave not even keel. And I'm interested to see if he can reach that level. I think that is the next level of Dave Canales we haven't seen, right? That level of edge, the Marty McFly getting called chicken, the Thanos, side of Dave Canales. Does it exist?
You're ready for there? The dark side. You're ready for the dark Dave. Yeah. Dark side of Dave. When will it him?
I want to see it, man. I want to see Anakin go to Darth Vader, bro. There's a level of that I want to see, and I love it. I talked to Riley Fields earlier, and talking. He's director of community relations for the Panthers. We were talking about FanFest, and we were talking about Dave and his attitude and just the positive vibes and everything. Every day is a championship opportunity, which I love. But I want to see Dave Canales get pissed. I want to see him get to when his back's up against the wall. What does Dave Canales look like? Yeah. And I think he had gotten to that a couple times last year. We saw it a little bit in Tampa, in that Sunday night.
That pushed everybody to the brink. We had people in the press box, present company included, was like,
we're all losing it. Exactly.
We couldn't say anything. We couldn't be audible with it. We were like.
And he had gotten to that point, but I want to see him bring something out of these players that because I think there's situations in this training camp where he's going to have to, because there are legitimate battles happening. I think that last year and the year prior, it's we're just figuring out the personnel. Now there's actual battles happening. So I'm interested to see what Dave Canales will bring out of these guys. I think for the coordinators, just meet the players where they're at, right? I think Brad Idzik, obviously, he does it already. He's got great energy. Jair Rivero, same deal. Got really good energy, little even keel, but obviously expects what he expects from his defensive end. But for Dave Canales, at this point, you have given up play calling. You have decided you are going to be the mentor and the take on that role and take on just you are the Don. Now, I'm using a Godfather reference here. Your consigliaries are set. You know who your capos are. You know who your people are, and you know who's going to, carry out your missions, right?
Yeah.
But how are you going to communicate the carrying out? How are you going to communicate to this level to really create something that will ultimately lead to success for this team? And there's just going to be times that again, I know he stays true to himself, but there's going to be times that you have to take it to a level where it's get it through your head. If you're not improving, or if you don't work on this, you're off the effing team.
Yeah, and I don't want to assume that he doesn't have that in him already from a internal level, but you raise a great point. We all evolve, whatever line of work we're in, whether it's the radio biz, whether it's marketing, engineering, whatever it might be, or in this case, coaching, which that can mean a lot of different things. And I think the value that Dave has under his belt here is he's seen it under Pete Carroll, one of the best that's ever done it. He's done a lot of different things, including coaching receivers directly, calling plays, now going back to a role that's new to him, very new to him, in that you are the CEO of this team now. You're not and I oftentimes wonder, let me get one of my placemats here. This is the dinner menu, this whole thing. It's, I would think it's like an actor that doesn't know what to do with his hands. Like he's not going to, I guess he'll have a play sheet, but he won't be calling the plays. But that probably is a bit of an adjustment. And that takes a great deal of discipline to have belief in your guy and let that go if you feel that's going to make your team better. So what does Dave Canales' day-to-day look like on game day and even during practice, but especially on game day versus what it looked like the last couple of years? There's a lot of value in what he's doing. I think the trust now turns and the spotlight turns to Brad Idzik, and the playbook, I'm sure, is the same. There's some wrinkles in there, some elements that'll be a little bit different, and Brad will own that because he's been a part of that install, a key part of that install for 3 years now. But you bring up a good point. Does Dave change his approach a little bit? Will you see visibly from our view, where we can monitor it on the field, something different about the way Dave communicates with his guys? Will he spend more time with the defense on the sideline, working with them, getting them motivated? I don't know how much value there is in that, but I know you mentioned a good point. You got to stay true to yourself, or else the players will start to see that. That never works out for a lot of coaches. So that's the one thing Parcells had always talked about, and he was a son of a bitch. Parcells is one of those guys that's on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of game day sort of mentality, in terms of their frustration level, sometimes bordering on the level of being out of control, like a Mike Ditka. But it is a different situation. I don't want to assume that Dave does not have audit, responsibilities with play calls or the ability to veto something here and there. But you raise a good point. What will this new Dave Canales look like? Because it is a new version of him in terms of what he's doing on the field for those 60 minutes, week 1 through week 18.
And that's the thing. As I say this, I don't think we're asking for, a completely different coach. I think we all, as analysts, as fans, love the culture that Dave and Dan Morgan are creating for this team. And it's the healthiest this franchise has maybe been ever, if not in a long time, right?
Amen to that.
Yeah. So, and that's a great thing. But, at the end of the day, when your back's against the wall and ultimately, you're in a make or break moment, and for his players, they're in a make or break moment. Where are you going with that? How are you going to pull out and make them dig deep in ways that they maybe haven't before? That's what I want to see with Dave Canales, because I think this is the first time we're going to get that opportunity. And you mentioned Brad Idzik, obviously Darrell Bevel, another guy added into this, coaching staff that, helps overseeing. Again, like, the task doing is off of Dave Canales' plate in many ways. So now, since there's no more task doing, how are you going to, for lack of a better term, apparently I really want to watch The Godfather. How are you going to dictate and instruct your mafia to carry out what you want to see? Yeah. So that's what I'm interested to see here, especially going into training camp. Again, it all starts up on Tuesday, so we're ready to go. Before we get out of here, we had talked about this a little bit, and I'd seen different tweets. And, I think the one thing that's really fun during preseason is you always see those surprise moments. You always see those people that maybe have stood out in a way that you weren't expecting, right? So, we'd asked on Twitter, and we got some responses, and they're fun ones, man. I've been watching film. The best first impressions that you've seen in preseason history for the Panthers. If you don't mind, I'll give you mine, because mine was last year with Jalen Coker. I think, people love Coker, obviously, and thought he was, on the up and up. Obviously, he didn't get a ton of reps in the preseason last year for the Panthers, but it was the first Panthers game I had ever been to. It was my first time in Bank of America Stadium, first time in that press box, first time experiencing this team. And they were playing the Browns, and obviously everybody's there watching Shadur Sanders. Everybody's there, like, watching Shadur, putting their focus on him, like, who's going to win that quarterback battle in Cleveland. And then Jalen Coker peels off a one-handed catch.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, my God, this guy's insane. I had heard the name. I had heard, obviously, the conversations and, of this kid who went to a small little school in Worcester, Massachusetts, Holy Cross, a lacrosse school. All those Northeast schools are lacrosse players, and that's it. But here's this kid peeling off a crazy route, and catching the ball one-handed. Yeah. And that was the moment I was like, oh, this is wide receiver 2. Like, this is the dude. This is, and like, it's at the moment we didn't know about T-Mac. So I'm like, there might be an argument here, right? And then obviously T-Mac had an incredible season, and it's like, okay, we know what we got here for real. But ultimately, having that reliability with Jalen Coker, I think all started in that preseason last year. And once he came back from injury, I mean, listen, he was the weapon that we all thought he could be, that the media was shocked by nationally. And so I think, when you think about great first impressions, for me last year, just coming into it, I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be a fun team to cover with Jalen Coker and the rest of this offense.
Well, we got some nominations on Twitter we'll get to here in a minute. I go back to last year, too, but I'll go his partner in crime, Tedero McMillan. And so no real secret. His scouting report was what it was. There were some concerns that he didn't care enough about football. What are you going to do about that noise? You can't do anything. It's in the past. But the physical traits, I mentioned it at the time. And I'm no Kreskin here, but when I saw him those first couple days, it was like, okay, this is special now. This is of all the Panthers receivers I have watched at camp over the years. And Steve Smith, a much different body type, body composition style of receiver, would be the best in franchise history. I think we can all agree. But I'm too young to remember a Muhsin Muhammad at training camp, second rounder out of Michigan State in 1996. I've seen guys come through here that look like Tedero McMillan in terms of the body type composition.
Yeah.
But never have I seen somebody look that big, play that fluid in reps in camp early on. And when I saw him getting challenged early in camp by Mike Jackson, by J.C. Horn, and the way he responded to that, there were a couple rough moments for him. But then he started exploding onto the field and making these types of plays from all around the field. The physical traits overwhelm you when you watch him. So when I think back to a lot of the guys I've seen, I'll stand by McMillan as a guy that physically you could see right away. If the health stays good and the mind's in the right place, it was a completely different ball game than guys we've seen before. Like Leggett, there was a learning curve with some things at camp. You go back to guys like DJ Moore, who was exceptional but had limits in his route running. Yeah, McMillan's the guy for me. On Twitter, some of the more obscure ones, and I love these, and I don't want to say he's obscure because he was a big part of the 2003 season, Deshaun Foster. One of my favorite players growing up. I loved Deshaun Foster. Like, I was not a Panthers fan, but like I loved the way he played. I thought he was like, because obviously as a guy growing up in Philly, Ryan Westbrook is your GOAT, right? He's the guy. And Deshaun Watson was like discount Brian Westbrook. Just, kind of a dog in the backfield, but also could catch it out of the backfield as well. Like sturdy hands. Things were good, versatile. I loved watching Deshaun Watson as a kid. Or sorry, Deshaun Foster. Deshaun Watson, I do not like watching. I do not enjoy him, and I don't like his off the field decisions either. Very important clarification there. There's a lot of Deshaun's out there. My Foster story. Look, this is before I was covering camp, but I was working the high school and college beat down here in South Carolina, and we would go to games back when I was just full bore crazy fanatic. And Foster was a guy that rookie year of 2002, people often forget, he had this amazing explosive run against the then Redskins that sort of opened up everybody's eyes. I think on that run, if I'm not mistaken, he stiff-armed Darryl Green, one of the greats of all time, and blasted down the boundary and showed some of that UCLA speed and contact balance that we had seen on tape. And then he blows his knee out. And the entire rookie season goes down the drain. So he gets healthy, he gets right. They sign Stephen Davis a year later, and much like a Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks situation, there are some parallels there. And Foster goes on to be a great role player, makes some plays, and then playoff time, he makes one of the great runs of all time in franchise history. I had him on one of my podcasts a while back, and I've gotten to know Deshaun a little bit. He's a great guy. And he was so cool to talk about. The famous run, sorry, Philly fan here. It's former Philly fan over here.
Let's not say former. I mean, week 6 is going to be tough for me. But, it's going to be tough. But I'll do my job.
He talked about, and Bill Rosinski, the great voice of the Panthers of days gone by, talked about it was the longest 1-yard run in history. And Foster broke 3 or 4 tackles. Nate Wayne was one of those guys. Dawkins was back there trying to get up and get to him. Brad Hoover comes up from behind and does the original tush push. We broke this down frame by frame with Deshaun. And he talked about at the time he couldn't feel anything. The adrenaline was so overwhelming that he couldn't feel Hoover coming up from behind and pushing the pile. But it was a great run. He had a great run in the Super Bowl where he dove to the end zone. He was dynamic. So, that the early impressions on him, even though he was not sort of an undrafted free agent guy, were fantastic. And I want to give credit to the guy who brought this up. This is Tom on Twitter at Taco Pizza 2468. Just make sure you don't put any lettuce on that taco pizza.
That's true. Yes, explosive diarrhea is bad. We don't want that.
We want explosive runs.
Explosive runs.
Not a certain kind of explosive run is what we're looking for.
An explosive backfield, not an explosive back end, if you will.
There you go.
We're simple men on this podcast, dude. It is what it is. Oh, man. Feel free to keep adding to the conversation, by the way. We got that on Twitter right now at Been Watching Film. We got a couple other responses there, but love the Deshaun Foster conversation. Great player. And again, also intimidating with that black face mask. Dude.
He was just so intimidating.
Something special,
he was
man.
He was one of the best Madden guys. There's certain guys that are Madden guys.
Dude,
he's good, but man, on Madden, he's unstoppable. He was one of those guys.
That Panthers team in general, was such a Madden, I swear, every time, it's so funny. I'd always try to get Deshaun Foster in, if I did a fantasy draft, I'd always try to get Deshaun Foster and Dan Morgan because they always had the black face mask. And I was it was sick. And then, funny enough, it's, obviously now it's hilarious because we see Dan as much as we do. It's full just circle. I'm not gonna, I'm just hey man, full circle, I guess.
Back in the day, I used to love you on Madden.
Yeah, dude. Man. Yeah, right. Let me shake your hand. Too funny, man. Oh. Oh man, it's funny as you mentioned Deshaun too. It's we gotta make sure, and for all our listeners out here, as we get ready for the new season, don't forget during preseason or during the training camp, we'll keep you covered. But once preseason hits, expect more episodes per week. Expect quite a bit. I mean, especially during the season as well. Which, by the way, we also do the Tailgate Show, which is a pregame show on 99.7 The Fox every game day, 4 hours before kicks. It's 9 o'clock on 1 o'clock games, and then usually around noon for 4 o'clocks, and then obviously our own thing for night games. But we'll be out at Clutch every single game. So that's Clutch on Cedar Street. So if you're in Charlotte, basically as you park on the I don't even know what side, what would that be, the north side of Bank of America Stadium, as you're out. I'm not good with directions. I think it's north side.
Back side. The back side where it goes downhill.
Just Google Clutch Kitchen and Poorhouse. You'll know where
the side opposite of the Honeywell building.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
I forget,
either way, every home game we're going to be out there, so come say what up. We have a whole setup that we're going to have. Shout out to our friends at Thompson and Renewal by Anderson and Independence Harley, all going to be out there with us. And, we'll be doing a live broadcast. And then after that, we'll do a live episode of Been Watching Film. So, basically, as you get into the stadium around 10:30, if you're a little bit of the later crowd, we'll be there. I mean, later of the early crowd, I guess. But we'll be out there. We'll be hanging out. And, of course, all season long, expect coverage from us. It's going to be awesome. We are stoked, to say the least. So, yeah. Here we go. I don't even know what else to say. We're ready.
I couldn't be happier, man. Last year was so much fun. And on a personal note, I believe this is year 5 that I'll be a part of the Tailgate Show.
Yeah.
Year 4, year 5. I can't remember. I think it's year 5.
I think it's year 5. Because
I'm excited. I want to tell you, it's been just so much fun expanding this into something that is fan friendly and fan centric, rather than me just sitting in a studio just talking about stuff. We could do that all day long, but man, Clutch is such a great venue. It's right there, as we always talk about, in the shadows of BOA. And boy, to have that crowd with us this year, it's going to be a party, man. Y'all come on out and see us.
Please come hang out, seriously. And of course, shout out to Neil, our friend from Clutch. I mean, he's got good food. He's opening early this year, which is sick. He's going to have breakfast early and everything.
Yeah.
Obviously can't sell the beverages until 10, but nonetheless, still going to have a good time. So come on by, come on out and see us, as John always says. And yeah, man, it'll be great. So speaking of which, we'll be back at it next week with our thoughts from the first week of training camp. Let's go, baby. Come on now. For E. White, I'm John Ellis. Or for John Ellis, I'm E. White. You guys take it easy.